Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast.
Welcome along to episode 34 of Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast. This is Dave D, sitting in South Staffordshire.
And me, Dave B, in Suffolk.
He'd nodded off then nearly, I think, look.
You threw me because that's not the normal intro.
I know, I'd like to mix it up a little bit. We're actually releasing a week later than usual. We thought we'd put it on pause while everything was happening following the Queen's death. So thanks a lot for finding us and listening into what we've got to say. We've got loads coming up, not just one but two chats this time, with two award winners.
A couple of months ago, Camera did their sort of annual awards. It also tied in with a book release. And what was really refreshing to see was a nice amount of craft featuring. So our first chat is with one of the award winners who won the sort of brewer to look out for almost, and he's won a contract doing it now. He gets to brew his beer. Quite how this is going to happen, we're not sure, having now chatted to Steve. But the winner was Steve Folland.
But he's got big plans. Well, he tells us all about them. You'll be able to find out just what those are. We also speak to Tom and Danny from Little Earth Projects of two of their beers featuring in a new book by Camera, so you can find out all about that. Hypwood Tripe's a good one, Dave, because you must be massively excited about this. I remember you saying to me, I used to love a Brute IPA, and then they went out of fashion, and now maybe they're on the way back.
Yeah, you managed to unearth one at Hamilton, who, when you think of Hamilton, or certainly when I think of Hamilton, I think of sort of stouts, really. Darker beers. I don't necessarily associate them with pales, but they have released a Brute IPA.
We've also got tried and tested, and we'll start in the usual way with a couple of beers from breweries we haven't had before in our feature Brew to Me. What have you got for us, Dave?
I have a craft beer from the only brewery based in Stevenage, which is Six Hills Brewing. If you wanted a craft beer story which fits our podcast template, you couldn't really get any better, because they started in 2017, started as home brewer, husband and wife outfit, and they've gone from strength to strength. Not available that much yet outside the Stevenage area, I think. I got in touch with them directly, and they very kindly sent some stuff along so I could get a bit of a flavour of what's going on. But it's more of a trade store at the moment rather than an actual sort of customer shop. But they are Stevenage's first craft brewery in tap room, which is great.
Six Hills? I'd never heard of them, so they're new to me.
Yeah, I can't remember how I found them, which method I used, but I'm very pleased I did. And the beer I've gone for out of the little selection they sent me is Paul Rides a Polar Bear version 7, which is a New England pale. And it is dry hopped with Citra, Simcoe, and Sabro. Not all of their cans are like this. Some of them are actually proper can art, but that is can art, but it is very got a label and stuck it on, sort of rippled. It hasn't sort of gone on. But I love that. I think it's brilliant.
It's kind of quite, sort of quite rustic looking, but very authentic as well.
Exactly. I think that sort of encapsulates a bit of what craft should be. So anyway, let's get onto the beer. It's not the fruitiest of noses. If anything, I'd say that's quite a Simcoe nose.
Well, that's good. It's at least you're not saying it's a Sabro nose.
No, it's not a Sabro nose. It's not a Sabro taste either. The Citra's there, so is the Simcoe. And then actually, I think the Sabro makes it a bit fuller without going full coconut. So there's a bit of a deft touch going on.
Yeah.
Really full for 4.5%, actually. Enjoyably so. That's really not bad at all, that. Sabro's just starting to come through a little bit more, but it's not, hopefully, the further I go down the can, it's not suddenly going to get sort of over the top and take over the whole beer. But it's a nice beer. I'm trying to think, as a comparison, it's not as fruity as a Daya.
It looks a sort of colour that I'd associate with a Daya, funny enough.
But it's not quite as... it's not quite on their palate, because I would just have them down as a bit fruitier.
I'll tell you what, though, because you're mentioning Daya in the same breath as them. I reckon that must be quite good.
It's a very nice beer. I'm very excited to try the other stuff I got from them. A very nice introduction.
Well, Six Hills started in 2017. The brewery I've got this time started way back in 2009. And I'm not sure why I've never had a beer from a brewery that's 13 years old.
Will this be a glaring omission, do you think?
I don't know. It's Brightside from Manchester.
Nope.
There you are. You see, it's not just me then. I might be cooking the books here a slight bit. I think I may have had one of theirs in the dim and distant past, but I can't remember what it tasted like. So essentially, it's new to me. They've been going since 2009, quite well established in Manchester, but never made it onto the big scene in the way that, say, Track and Cloudwater have done.
Track wouldn't be an unfavourable comparison to this, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's a good shout. Like, just that bit lighter almost. I don't think of Track as doing really heavy stuff. So it's something like a Sonoma. It's not Sonoma. There's some sort of hints of things like that in there.
Now, I've got a Hell's Lager, which is unlike me to have a Hell's, isn't it?
That's very unlike you.
Not my go-to. It's been a busy day at work, though, so a Hell's would go down nicely. Let's see what this is like. Yeah, it's a Hell's. Clean, crisp, a little bit malty. Yeah, quite malty.
Don't like a malty Hell's, I'll be honest. It shouldn't be that. It should be more crisp and malty for me, anyway.
It's a little bit darker than I might expect, and then that would explain that maltiness, I guess. But talking about malt and grain and hops and yeast and stuff, on their website they've got a section about how they reuse and recycle. At Brightside, they have 2 dairy farmers who collect their spent grain and use it as cattle feed. They brew 3 to 5 days a week, but are really proud of the fact they only fill about half of a domestic black bin each week, which is interesting. Shows you how on top of their recycling they are. You'd think there must be an enormous amount of waste for a brewery, but it sounds like these guys are really on it.
They're brewing 3 to 5 times a week. It just goes to show how in your local area you can create a following, and that can sustain you almost. Not everyone needs to be nationwide, do they?
I would say that they must be sizable-ish in terms of the breweries we talk about. But yeah, that's good. They have a whole range of beers. They've got stouts, mild, short bread porter, dark Belgian beers, hoppy pales. They cover the whole spectrum.
So they try their hand at every style then?
Yeah, nice introduction to Brightside. And it sounds like they're doing great things. I'd like to find out more about them, actually.
Get in touch with us on Twitter and Instagram at Daftaboutcraft1.
Right, well, it's guest time on the podcast, and we usually have a brewer from a brewery we might have heard of, might not have heard of. This time it's a little bit different because we've got a home brewer, but we've got an award-winning home brewer. So welcome to the podcast, award-winning Steve Folland.
Hey, nice to be here.
Oh, we're thrilled. We do love a big stout, and you're the big stout man.
Not just my stout that's big.
Well, we should tell people who might not have heard of you. Steve was awarded Home Brewer of the Year by CAMRA at the Great British Beer Festival with a 16% stout.
I entered the beer just to get some professional opinion on, so I could see, whether I was, going in the right direction. Because after the judging, they were going to release the tasting notes, which to me was invaluable. And I said to my wife, because there were, I think, 10 categories, that although I may win the category, because I knew it was a good beer, just having tasted one about 2 months before, I said, but it will never win because it's too strong. So I didn't even go to the Great British Beer Festival, even though I had a free ticket, because I was working. And I figured, well, it's not going to win, so why?
So you weren't even there. Wow, that's tremendous. Well, I have got the beer in front of me, so I think Dave's got a question to ask. I'm going to open the beer.
As Dave says, you're a home brewer. How long have you been home brewing for?
The bottle of beer you're holding is the first beer I ever brewed. So that's when it started, 2017. Started big. I needed to enter a competition with it. I just brewed it because I figured if I could brew something of that strength and that it worked, that I could potentially brew anything.
Well, it seems to have worked. Dave, you're sniffing away on the beer. What does it smell like?
Well, I'm so delighted I've got one because there's only a few of these in existence at the moment, isn't there?
There are only 3 left after these 2.
Wow. Doggy in the Woods, it's called, Oak Aged Stout. And I've just taken the lid off the bottle. Raisiny, and smells like something that could have come from a fully fledged craft beer brewer.
Thank you.
Now, is that your sort of aim, Steve? Because obviously it's probably the question to sort of address a bit is obviously you've won an award at a CAMRA event. Now, we are a craft beer podcast. We're not by no means against CAMRA in the sense that we both like cask ale as well, quite happy to have it. Where do you sort of come down? What do you like to drink when you're not brewing and things like that?
I like good beer. I don't care whether it's cask or keg.
Yep.
As long as it's well made and tastes good, that's where I'm not a snob with cask. I'm quite happy to walk into a bar and have something that's on keg as well as a cask. So
I've got some friends who love massive stouts.
yeah.
And I just know that when I send them a picture of this, they're going to be so jealous. That does taste awesome. And it doesn't taste, I think that's what they said, it didn't taste at 16%. It's really drinkable.
No. As soon as they phoned me to say that I'd won, they said, "Are you happy to talk to the press?" And I said, "Yeah, no problem." They had one of the journalists from The Guardian there who was actually on the judging panel. And he said that prior to them tasting this one, there was an 11%er that the judges have gone, well, this is really boozy and really strong. And somebody said, well, just wait for this one. This is 16%. and they had it and basically just went, wow, just, couldn't believe that it was that strong and that drinkable. And that comes from 5 years of aging. When that was first made, it was harsh, it was boozy, it was very bitter. For 5 years, it's just mellowed and all the flavours kind of perfectly balanced now. So,
well, I think that's the secret to it, having left it so long. It is really lovely and well balanced, and nothing is taking over. It's everything's there in its place. That's lovely, really good. Just to go back again, so this was the first beer you made?
Yes. I made beer from kits in the early 90s,
right?
But was disappointed with them. They never tasted like proper beer.
No, I've done that as well. They never do. They
kind of edge to them. There was just something about them that just didn't work. Just didn't do anything else until 2017. I borrowed some kit from my friend. And when it turned up, it was basically a plastic fermenter with some kettle elements sticking in the inside. And I thought, if I'm going to make a 16% beer with 12 kilos of grain, it's just going to catch fire. So I persuaded my wife to allow me to buy, it was an Ace brewer unit, which has got a concealed element, a magnetic circulation pump, removable stainless steel basket that you can put the grains in, just something that's more suited to brewing a big beer. It was the very first beer I ever made.
That must fill you with a lot of confidence for your future brewing career.
Well, I've made probably 100 or so beers since then. There are 7 versions of Doggy in the Woods. The last one I made just about a year and a bit ago. And it's each version is just slightly different. So that was with a bourbon barrel. I've made them with rum barrels, whiskey barrels, with hazelnut, with spiced rum. And the last one was a quadruple chocolate. So it has, because my daughter worked for Hotel Chocolat, she had all this sort of product that was being binned, used to bring it home and I'd throw it in my beer. So the last one has 4 different types of Hotel chocolate in it. And it's like drinking a bar of alcoholic chocolate. It's flat as hell at the moment because it takes about a year for it to get any kind of conditioning, but it will be absolutely stunning. And in a couple of years' time, I'll send you some.
Oh, please do. Goodness.
So I was gonna say all these iterations of Doggy in the Woods. Then it's the same process. You're not changing anything. You're not going to. They're all going to be coming out. So in 4 or 5 years' time. So you're always going to have one, but it's going to be 4 or 5 years when it was first brewed. That's brilliant.
I see the award was to have it commercially brewed. I have been questioning how they're actually going to commercially brew this, because it is the least commercial beer you could possibly think of.
So does it worry you a little bit that when they commercially brew it, which was part of the prize, that it won't be as good as what you've created here?
It probably will be after 5 years, which is why it's not commercial. I spoke to the guy who was brewing it, and he said that they told him only 5 minutes before the award the strength of the beer. And that was just to stop his jaw from hitting the floor when it was announced, actually at the beer festival.
So it's Brewhouse and Kitchen in Worthing who are going to brew this commercially. So has their head brewer ever tackled a beer like this before?
I don't think so, because I had to explain that my brew unit wasn't big enough to take all the grains, so I had to brew it in two batches, combine them for the boil, and then stick them in the fermenter for 3 months. And he said he's probably going to have to split it as well because his kit's not big enough to take that quantity of grain once it's scaled up.
Wow, that's fascinating, isn't it?
It is just incredible. But yeah, he's looking at the moment at the supplies. The problem is it has 1.25 kilos of honey. It has 10 shots of espresso. It has 100 grams of Hotel Chocolat 100% cocoa drops. So all that on top of shed load of grains.
Well, for one thing, that's not going to be a cheap beer to brew.
No, and that's the beauty of home brewing, that you can experiment, you can be wild. It's the time is the problem, I think. The fact that it took nearly 3 months to ferment incredibly slowly, which is why the alcohol is very sort of background rather than if you do it quickly, it's a poor quality alcohol, in my opinion. So 3 months. Then it was 3 months on bourbon barrel chunks, which I had to make because I couldn't buy any. So I had to get a piece of wood that a friend of mine had got from a wood that he maintains for an old lady, chopped it up, stuck it on the barbecue, charred it, stuck it in a bag full of Jack Daniels for 3 months, took the chunks out, threw them in the beer. That was my attempt at a bourbon barrel.
I was going to ask you whether you actually used a barrel or wood chips for this beer.
Yeah, they were chunks. They were about an inch square and 4 inches long.
I'll tell you what, having told us what's in this beer, I bet you're glad you don't have to put how many calories are in it on the side.
No, exactly. Well, as it's so strong, I think a lot of the sugar is kind of gone. It's probably fairly good on carbs, but not so good on calories.
Yeah.
But it's a party in a glass. It's not something you go in and have a pint of or whatever. You would just, it's a nightcap. Friends of mine who drink it, the gentleman Mark in question that gave me back these beers, he would just have, well, he may split it over a couple of nights and just have, a wine glass full of it. But I brewed it because I don't like beer in quantity. I don't like going out and having 6, 7, 8 pints. So I'd rather have a couple of very strong ones and then just enjoy it that way.
So are you happy to just remain a home brewer, or do you want to expand your horizons a bit?
Yeah, I've just moved to Polperro in Cornwall, and I gave up my job about 3 weeks ago. This is my last week of officially working, but is actually holiday. And no, I plan to be a brewer. That's my goal, is to open Polperro's first brewery.
That's tremendous.
Wow. And have you already sort of started sizing up where you're going to, a property or anything for what you're going to do?
Not at the moment. Literally, we arrived here last Friday and then went on holiday for a week in Polzeth to get some surf and sun. So we've been just trying to sort out boxes at the moment. This room is actually fairly clear, but we're just in a sea of cardboard at the moment. So probably the beginning of next week, I'll start looking at premises and equipment. I sold all my old brewing equipment as well before we moved because I didn't want to move it here. It was too small for what I plan anyway. So, and hopefully the award will give me a sort of an in when I start talking to people.
Yeah, it's a massive platform, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's I'm just still stunned and shocked about the whole thing. I can't believe it. I can't believe how much interest it's generated. I had a letter from the House of Commons, and my wife jokingly said, "Oh, they're probably congratulating you on your beer," and they were. It was a local MP just saying, saw this in the Newbury Weekly News and congratulations and all that stuff. The local pub in the village that I used to live in said, we'll take a cask of it. I thought, take a cask? 72 pints of 60. They're going to be selling that very slowly.
So all these beers that you've been making and you've been aging, if your dream comes true and you turn it into a reality, you'll be able to sell this stuff.
Yeah, that's the plan. Apart from Doggy, I've made some Belgian-style beers, They start about 9% and go up to 14.5%. I've made a thing called Liquid Monster, which is a homage to Siren Craft's Liquid Mistress and Liquid Monstrous, except mine was 12.5%. Nice red ale, 7 hops, 4 dry hops and 3 fresh hops. And I just threw as much in as I possibly could. And again, a delightful beer after 3.5 years of being in a bottle.
So you're completely self-taught then?
Yeah, I was a contractor working for National Grid. Whilst I was there, earned enough money to take a year off. And during that year, I thought I will research how to brew, and researched how to brew, bought the equipment, brewed that first beer, anything I could get my hands on, 6 months, almost constant checking, what you have to do. And it worked.
You've sort of blown us away, really, with your story and your beer
so
as well.
much to take on board. The thing I'm interested in, obviously, is it sounds like very much you're not going to stray from what's got you here, which is really brilliant. What would that do with your sort of premises? Are you sort of taking it on the idea that you'll just go there and brew? This is what you do now, and it doesn't matter that you just start and there's not going to be some beer ready in 6 weeks.
No, I may do a sort of like 2-pronged thing. So I may brew a sort of regular beer or 2 or 3 regular beers that I can just start selling within a couple of weeks. But long term, I will just be brewing this stuff that I love to brew and storing it in barrels and racking it off and selling bottles or cans of it in 3-4 years' time.
What does your wife make of all this?
She loves my beer. So many of them have been named by her. So I when I first made the Belgian beer, she took a sip of it and went, Bruges. I went, okay, so it's called Bruges from now on. and then the Bigfoot brewery is my wife's foot because she's got big feet. So that's a photo I took of her diving off a boat in Barbados, and I just cartoonized it and stuck it on the label. So
I can see that Bigfoot artwork on the bottle I've got. Is that what you would call the brewery then?
No, I'll call it the Polpera Brewery or the Polpera Brewing Company or something. There's a lot of tourists around this area, and if I want to get a head start, get something that's local, make it piratey, get it out there, there'll be plenty of people that will want to buy it as souvenirs, or, I will guarantee that it will be a great beer, or they will be great beers, and people will want to drink them. And there's a real sort of lack of local stuff down here. You might get the odd tribute or Menadoo or something like that. Yeah, get something that's actually made in the village with a Polpera name.
Sounds like you've got it all worked out.
Well, in my head.
But you're sort of Navy strength beers as well, so you've sort of got that bit cornered as well.
Exactly. Somebody I used to work with, prior to this, I worked for a company based in Dublin. He does a lot of leather work, and he said, did you realise that, tankards used to be made of leather, and then they were sealed with beeswax inside and out before they used metal containers? He said, when you get your logo, I'll make you a load, because he does a lot of hats and, bags and things for people. And he said, I can make tankards. So good little bit of advertising, one of those. Yeah. It's all there. It's kind of all floating around my head at the moment. So,
how do you sleep at night with all these ideas going around your head?
I don't have a job anymore. Yeah, my previous job, I was saying to my wife today, every day I was going to bed thinking, who am I talking to tomorrow? Am I doing a demo? What have I got to do in the demo? What might they ask me that I don't know? So I can just go to bed thinking about beer and what to do and how I'm going to do it. It's idyllic. It's living the dream, even though I haven't started yet.
It sounds amazing. I don't like to be a doom bringer, but are you still sort of quite confident, even with everything that's going on at the moment? Like, trying to start a brewery does seem a very daunting task with the sort of way of the world at the moment.
Yeah, we're in an enviable position that we sold a big house in West Berkshire and bought a much smaller house in Polpera. So we actually have some money in the bank sat there. And if I don't make any money for a year, it's not a problem. Happy.
Yeah, that comes across.
Yeah. If all this gets off the ground as you expect, and there's every reason to have confidence that it will. I mean, wow, future looks great, doesn't it?
Very happy. The house is great. The weather's been fabulous here. My memories of Cornwall were always grey and miserable and mist and cold, and it's just been glorious. We're 100 metres from the sea, walk out of our back gate, turn right, and the sea and the rocks are just there. So, inspiration. I'd like to be like Cloudwater, where they just make the beer they want to make, they sell it, you buy it, people like their beers, people buy their beers. That's the kind of thing. And if I was doing something in a pub, talking to Kevin Brady at Indigenous, he said he kind of misses the whole home brewing flexibility. So every day he's got to get up and he's got to make so many gallons of this beer with this recipe, and it's got to be the same as the last time. And really, I don't know if I want to do that. I want to just go, I'm going to make an interesting beer, and this is what it is. And if you want it, you buy it.
It's kind of the trade-off of being really successful at brewing, that you have got to keep making the same beers again, and people expect them to taste the same every time.
Exactly. Yeah. That's fine. Maybe if you have employees that can carry on and do those, and you can experiment. But I like the throwing a bit of something else in there, or I've got this, I'll use that instead. And using up ingredients. One of the beers I made was using wild yeast. So I just made one of my regular sort of pale ales, and then just left the fermenter outside for an hour, and then clipped the lid back on and just waited for a day. Nothing really much had happened. A day and a half, there was a tiny little pinprick of activity. And then about 2 hours later, there was about an inch worth of foam and stuff on top of it. And this was a wild yeast. And then to prime the bottles, I put in some sour cherry ice cream topping from Hotel Chocolat again. That was out of date. But it had enough sugar to give it carbonation, gave it a slightly sour cherry flavour, and it had that traditional wild yeast kind of funk to it.
You just love experimenting and just making weird and wonderful beers, don't you?
Cooked since I was a small child. I just see making beer as another form of cooking with a bit of science, with a bit of alchemy. If you love what you do,
do let us know when Polpero gets up and running. And
absolutely
fascinating to see how this goes. It sounds brilliant as an idea.
I'll send you some of the beers as well when they start coming out, and also when the commercial version of Doggy.
It'd be fascinating to see how that goes.
Yeah, hopefully you'll be doing this in 5 years, so it should be.
Fingers crossed. Look, hopefully we'll come and meet you in person one of these days as well when you're up and that.
Part of the world, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, always welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us. Right, it's the time of the podcast where we talk about what beers we've been drinking and what we've really enjoyed drinking the most since our last episode. And I'll kick it off. I went to Farm Trip 2022, Rivington's beer festival recently, which was a tremendously well organised event. Went with Hannah and Paul from Hall, had a great time, stayed in one of their bell tents, which was really interesting, real good fun. Had loads and loads and loads of beers, but it's the first beer that I had on our second day that I enjoyed the most. Maybe that's because it was the first beer of the day, I don't know, but it was from Donzoko, and it was a lambic, what they describe as a lambic fruit beer, which was called Summer Beer. Just 4%. Lemony, refreshing, drank it in the sunshine. Oh, it's absolutely perfect. If I could have only drunk that all day, I think I'd have been happy. It was brilliant.
Well, this is quite a role reversal, because for starters, I can only go on the fact that I've had two which I've rated equally in the last few weeks, so I feel it's only fair to do both. But both are at the complete opposite end of the ABV scale, which is usually your territory nowadays, not mine. But first of all, I had Well Rested from Cloudwater, one of the beers that came to me from when I left working with you.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. Yeah, we got
the Cloudwater set.
Yeah, we bought you they just released a set, hadn't they? And we got you the set. Right, excellent.
And this is an 11.3% barley wine.
Crikey.
I would say it's probably the best barley wine I've had. it's sweet and it's apple, but it's caramel and it's toffee, and it doesn't ever get too much. And that was so easy to drink. It was dangerously easy to drink. It went down quite quickly, as I seem to remember.
What size bottle was that?
It was I think it was a 375.
Oh, okay. I've got images in my head of you swigging off a 750 share.
No, it wasn't one of. No, but I do have 2 bottles of it. Well, I have one now. And the other beer came from our friends at Fine Ales.
Oh.
And as we mentioned at the start of this episode, we delayed our episode because of the passing of the Queen. And it felt only right to try and have something fitting on that day. And I went for a Muscatel barrel-aged Mills and Hills, which is their stout. And this was 11.9%.
Nice.
Also, brilliant beer. When you think of those barrel-aged stouts, you want them to be sort of warming, sort of with depth of flavour, not just sort of coffee or dark. And this had way more than that. It smelled amazing as well, poured really nicely. I've had this for sort of practically a year, because I got it when we went up there for our honeymoon a year ago. I don't know how fresh that was when I got it, but it's certainly aged perfectly for a year. So yeah, 2 big beers, but 2 big beers that were well worth holding on to. If
you'd like to let us know what you've been drinking and enjoying, find us on Instagram. That's the best way to get hold of us, and we'll give you a mention on the next episode. Which reminds me, I should say hi to Emma Thomas, and thanks a lot for your message on Instagram, which we only found recently, despite you having sent it ages and ages ago, when we were talking about Tiny Rebel. We did one of their beers for Hype or Try. She was saying that she had the honey glazed ham one, and she wasn't mightily impressed with it. But thanks a lot for listening, Emma. I hope you're enjoying this one. If you want to let us know what you've been enjoying drinking recently, let us know. We'll share it with everybody.
You're listening to Dave B and Dave D on Daft About Craft, the craft beer podcast.
Well, we spoke earlier on the podcast to Steve Folland, who recently won CAMRA's Home Brewer of the Year award. And now we've got a brewery with us who recently appeared not once but twice in a book from CAMRA detailing the best 250 beers from around the world. It can only be Little Earth Project. Welcome, Tom and Danny from Little Earth.
Hello.
What's it like to have produced 2 of the best beers in the world then?
I'm not sure if they are 2 of the best beers in the world, but
I'll take it if they say they are. Take it.
Yeah, I will take it. They're certainly unique, like all the beers that we brew. They're a little bit different to how most breweries go about making beer. Slightly different recipes, different way of looking at how to produce beer, basically. Yeah, I think if you produce something unique, it's going to stand out.
And just for anyone who isn't sort of familiar with what Little Earth Project does, what is it when you sort of put your beers together that makes them different?
So all of our beers are mixed fermentation. So some of them are quite sour, some of them are quite funky. Unlike some of the kind of quick sours that you can buy in the shops now, they take quite a long time to make. About 90% of the beer that we make is aged in oak, and all of it takes at least kind of 4 or 5 months for the very quickest turnover stuff, and sometimes up to 3 years. It's a process that takes quite a long time, and because you're using wild yeast, it's not always the most predictable process either.
I was just thinking when you said there about other breweries doing quick sours, what you think of breweries who do put out a lot of new sour beers regularly. I guess they're totally different to what you're doing.
As long as people understand that there's a difference in the kind of things that we're doing, you know, that the beers that we make do take time, and they sit in a barrel in a room taking up space for 2 years. So there are different ways. If it's a quick sour, it's something you can produce quickly, you can get out. It doesn't mean that it's not nice, it doesn't mean that it's not good or crafted in a skilled way, but it is produced in a different way. So I don't think that they can necessarily be viewed on the same plane.
When you say sour beer, it encompasses such a massive range of different beers.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Yeah, you put sour, you don't really have a separation. When people say sour beers, it's generally mixed ferm, it's kettle sours, it's it all encompasses that kind of flavor, I suppose. Whereas mixed fermentation tends to have maybe a bit more of a depth of flavor, just from the aging, from barrels, from potentially ingredients that are added. So there is a difference, and I guess it's kind of about talking about it and shouting about it and saying, we're all allowed here, but we are a bit different as well.
Yeah.
So some things take time, and that's maybe why there's a difference in things like pricing on the shelves and or availability. You know, we don't do very large batches either. So, you know, you might like something and you might try it once, but there's not a guarantee that you may ever get it again.
It's like when you find a nice wine, isn't it? You find it once, you can never track it down again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it. Even wine. I know there's a lot of wineries that obviously try and do a lot to make sure that each vintage is very similar. But there's a lot more even natural, organic, biodynamic wineries that are, you know, kind of going a similar way that we do our beers, that are letting nature take its course. And this vintage is this vintage, and next year it might taste a bit different depending on the climate, depending on, you know, this year, you know, there was not a lot of rain, so a lot of grapes will be affected by that one way or another. You know, it'll be very difficult not to get real depressing, but with climate change, you know, to keep that kind of stuff.
It's really interesting how that might affect the industry.
We do forage a lot of our ingredients. We grow our own hops. We source local organic barley as well. So as things change or as things progress, we have to kind of keep in mind what's available, what might be available, what might not be, what could be, because as it's getting warmer, you know, you might be able to grow different things or, you know, plant new things and expand on that as well. So it's, well, slightly daunting, also quite exciting.
Wine is often seen as a product connected to the land, whereas brewing is often seen as kind of an industrial product. It is often made in industrial estates and in big factories, basically. Whereas wine, although sometimes it's made in big industrial estates and big factories, in people's minds, it's kind of when people think of wine, they see kind of vineyards and on the sides of hills and things like that. They don't.
It's a bit more romantic.
It's a bit romantic, and whereas beer, people don't see that. Whereas we wanted to start a brewery that was really kind of connected to where we are, kind of connected to the seasons and the land.
Now I've heard the concept explained, it makes so much sense. As soon as you were saying that, I was thinking of the little brewery bit you've got next to the pub, which is almost in my head, and I know it's not, but it's almost like a little windmill type thing, which is then next to the camping bit, and then it just all makes sense, that sort of romantic side of it, and a bit more farmyard rather than a, you know, like you say, an industrial estate and everything. Did the pub come first, then the brewery, or what was the sort of order in your head of when you're putting it all together?
Going kind of all the way back, my family became involved in the pub in 2005, so it's over 17 years ago now. It didn't have a brewery at the time, and where the brewery is now was an old stable block that had been kind of partially blown down in the storm in 87 and kind of rebuilt, and it didn't look anything like the original building. There was a building there, but it was kind of corrugated tin and things like that. It didn't look particularly pretty, but it kind of served kind of purpose to previous landlords. They used it for outdoor events and they used it for storage. There was a bar in there for when they had things going on at the pub in the beer garden. And then we thought we need to do something with this and do something that will draw people to the pub. So a brewery seemed like the very obvious thing. So that was built over 2007 and 8. And I ran a little cask-focused brewery in there from 2008 until 15 when we started Little Earth Project. So it goes back quite a long way.
Yeah, I didn't realise it went back as far as that.
There have been kind of, different landlords over the years. It was kind of leased out to different people. So we haven't been, directly involved as we have been in the last probably, about a year and a half now. We kind of got slightly more involved about 4 years ago, but we still had managers in place that post-COVID had an opportunity to kind of take it back under our wing and thought, we could use all the work. So we got a young couple from London, actually, who relocated out here.
I actually remember seeing that job advert, and I couldn't get the wife to go for it.
It was quite interesting. We had a lot, like it was wild in the 2 years between the first hiring process and the second hiring process, just the difference in applications. And I think it was obviously more because we'd probably taken more of a lead on it the second time around and had kind of tried to put it in more maybe craft beer spaces as opposed to more traditional pub manager places. Because we do continually have a vision for how it can be, and we want to make it a bit more of a proper destination, consistent across all parts of the business, and cohesive, I think is maybe the right word. Kind of keep everything working together as opposed to kind of separate parts of the same business. So as of April last year, we opened. All summer we did table service and outdoor only, as we were instructed to do, and only opened inside, I think the third week of October last winter. yeah, we've had a pretty good summer. It's kind of gearing up. We don't obviously right now everyone's in a similar boat of what is going to happen this winter. It feels like we're in a pretty good place, but
yeah, a
it's
good place might not be good enough.
Yeah,
No, there's a lot up in the air at the moment, isn't there? So Little Earth essentially began as Little Earth in 2015 then. So you must have seen a lot of changes during that time, 7 years.
Yeah, so when we started, I think we were probably the only brewery in the country just doing mixed fermentation beer. And obviously that side of things has taken off. Lots of breweries have kind of got side projects where they do sour beers and barrel projects. But yeah, the industry has kind of changed a lot. Everything was all craft beer was in bottles back then, and it's all in cans now. Kind of really taken off in that time. But there was kind of a bit of a link there because the beers that we were doing in the old brewery were kind of, as cask beers go, they were kind of fairly progressive cask beers. We used lots of kind of New World hops, and we were one of the first breweries to use Citra and Nelson Sauvin and hops like that. So the kind of pub had, since we'd been involved, had kind of a growing craft beer lineup, not quite as kind of as extensive as it is now, but kind of going back to the early days, we were kind of one of the first pubs to have a Brewdog in East Anglia. Yeah, Cask Punk IPA and 5am Saint. There's always been a bit of that going on in the pub as kind of craft beer has become more popular. We've got a brewery that's doing some really interesting things. We're kind of pushing the pub forward with that as well.
We mentioned the 2 awards you had. Now, one of those beers I do know was a 16.5% barley wine. To give people an idea what's available now maybe and what's coming up, because as you say, so no 2 beers are the same.
No, so even though all of our beers kind of are a little bit sour, a little bit funky, they range kind of every colour that you could imagine a beer be, every ABV. Some will be very sour and some will be more kind of yeast forward. There's a real mix. So the ones that were in the book, there was the barley wine. It's quite sweet. It's quite strong, boiled for more than 24 hours. So it became caramelized. So it's quite a dark colour, even though it was just pale malts used. And the other beer that was in the book is called Hedgerow Blend, which is a blend of 2 barrels of sour beer that we pick out of the stock of barrels that we have every year. And we add whatever fruit we can get hold of this time of year, just from the hedgerows and local wild hops that just grow in the hedges as well.
So I think that one was damsons, plums, blackberries, and elderberries. Whereas this year, I think there might be some green gages we found growing behind one of the camping cottage or one of the cottages. There's blackberries. We went for a walk on Saturday and we found blackberries. We found elderberries, all sorts of things. So it's kind of a whatever is seasonal and whatever is kind of growing.
Last year there was lots of damsons around, so that was kind of the main thing in there. This year, lots of all different sorts of plums, but a more kind of spread of them. And there's lots of elderberries about. The plants that have survived seem to have lots of berries on, and some of them don't seem to have done that well. So yeah, it's one of those beers that it will be different every year.
Do you get many local people coming to try your beers out?
More and more.
More.
I just wondered how they have adapted to the kind of beers that you produce.
I mean, some are more with it. Some have taken a little bit longer to warm up to it. We have, I mean, the pub isn't just our beer, because that would be like business suicide to have, 16 lines of sour beer in the middle of nowhere.
I mean, that sounds fantastic to me. It sounds awesome.
Well, I mean, it's not the worst thing. And, I think if we could pick it up and put it in Belgium, it would do very well. But rural Suffolk still working on it. But it's all right. We get kind of people coming from all over, but locally it's kind of starting to pick up. People just, they want to come in and they see that there's a brewery on site and they want to try it. And, you kind of warn them and warm them up to it. And I mean, because we ferment our beers using cider lees, a lot of it does have sometimes, like some of, especially more of the golden sours and like fruited ones, do have a bit more of a cider quality to them. So as long as people kind of have that frame of mind going into tasting it, they tend to, maybe come around to it a bit more, as long as they're not thinking lager when they drink it or bitter. It'll probably be all right. But that's why we have all the different options as well. We've got 16 lines, we've got 10 lines of kind of just your lagers and pales and normal beers. And then 6 lines of sours. So 5 of our own. Right now we have 1 guest line as well. So people can do flights, they can sample through them, or they can just have a pint of Utopian or Braybrook and be on their, like, be perfectly fine and happy with that.
I love watching what people are drinking in pubs and at festivals and stuff. People do seem to be more willing to experiment with different things now than they were, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think having the flight option does kind of let people get really like, oh, can I do that? Or, oh, I did that when I was in America or in Belgium, or, because it is very common other places, and it's maybe more common in bigger, cities and certain bars. It's kind of been a thing for a while, but I think in rural pubs, it's not a thing at all. So when you offer it and say, well, if you don't know what to try, why don't you try? You just only have to have a third, or I can give you a taster.
We went to a beer festival recently locally called Hops Farm, which is organised by two brews in Colchester and Jack Rabbit. I think a few years ago, at a festival like that, people wouldn't have known what to expect with the beers that we're brewing. Whereas now you tell people you're brewing sour beer, and even if people haven't had your beer before, if they've come to a beer festival, they'll have some understanding of what to expect. We certainly kind of have maybe a wider range of people come to us at festivals like that, not just the real kind of beer geeks, maybe people that just enjoy drinking something a bit different occasionally.
So if you had to ask you one more question, where would you want to see Little Earth in, say, 5 years' time?
We want to stay on a scale where we can do most of the stuff ourselves. I think we want to build on the reputation that we've got already. We've got a little bit of space where I think medium term we might want to build a little barrel store. All the beer we make is fermented with cider lees, and that comes from a cider that my family's made for a long time. So it's a natural cider where the apples are just pressed. So at some point we might bring the cider making down to the pub as well, which would be quite a nice little thing to kind of have down there, and do kind of community presses and have something else of interest on site. So yeah, I think we don't need to be massive. I think getting more people out to where we are and out to the pub, because the nature of the beer that we brew, it's kind of supposed to be representing the kind of locality and where we are. I think the best place to drink it is at the place where it's made. So I think just making the White Horse a bit of a craft beer destination, and like Danny said earlier, kind of making the whole site a bit more kind of cohesive and working together, and maybe doing some more events and things in the pub, tastings and things like that. So not kind of a crazy ambitious. We just want to
rule the world.
A nice little pub with nice beers, basically.
It sounds like what you've got is absolutely perfect, and you just want to fine tune a few little things to make it even more perfect.
Yeah, it'd be nice to be able to grow things enough that, I'd love to see us be able to hire another person, at least potentially more people in the pub more long term, kind of just get like summer staff right now. But we've grown like our food offering in there. So that's, as long as that stays growing, then that will grow. Like we'll be able to hire more for there. But the pub itself, if we do build a barrel store, I think it would be nice to have, another person at least kind of about to help manage that. And because when we go away for festivals, there's no one here in the brewery. And for the most part, most of the festivals are in the summer when we're not brewing. Tom brewed today and he brewed last week, and that's the first time I think he's brewed in about 4 months, because over the summer it's just quite warm. It's difficult, it doesn't really work well for the fermentation and the barrels and stuff, because nothing's temperature controlled in the barrel store. So if it's really hot, it's 30 degrees, or it's just gonna make things go out of whack, and you can get some pretty rough fermentation out of that, and some really awful flavors coming out of stuff like that. So
when it comes to getting hold of your beers, what's the best way to go about it?
Then we work with 3 distributors, one based in London, one in kind of Cambridge area, and one kind of Midlands. But we also work with, we do bruiser boxes, which have been quite popular, which has been quite helpful because it's something that gets direct to people, but it's not necessarily managed by us. We just have to pack them up and send them out, which is quite handy. Yeah. And it's kind of gotten more beers out direct to people, I think.
Thank you so much for joining us on Daftaboutcraft today. It's been very interesting. I love it when we get couples on. Every now and again we get a couple. It's really interesting because you get 2 different viewpoints. It's great fun.
I'm the mouthpiece. Sorry.
It's always the same. It's always the same. Look, thank you very much. Can't wait to get down there and try some of your beers as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
And now it's time for Hype or Tripe.
cast your mind back 5 or 6 years. There was this weird thing that suddenly came around called Brute IPA. For the next 2 years, it was everywhere. You couldn't get away from the stuff. Then all of a sudden it died, and now it appears to be back. Our hype or tripe beer this time is from Hamilton. And it's a Brute IPA called I Am Brute. I'm excited about this, Dave.
Yeah, so I think they've taken the rip-off I Am Clute, haven't they, for the can?
I was looking at the font. I was trying to think, I've seen that font somewhere.
Yeah, so as you say, Brute IPAs were everywhere. You couldn't move for them.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a big fan because, to me, a Brute IPA, they're quite light and dry. This says on the back exactly what the point of it is. This light-bodied Brute IPA is hugely refreshing, tropical and aromatic. All the while, it consists of many characteristics similar to champagne, bone dry and highly effervescent. Now, I don't like champagne at all, particularly. I find it too dry.
If you were at a wedding and they were doing the wedding toast, you'd prefer a Brute IPA than the champagne, yeah?
100 times out of 100. I don't get champagne. My palate doesn't,
San Francisco is where this style emanated from, by the way.
Oh, nice.
A brewmaster at the Social Kitchen and Brewery in San Francisco's Inner Sunset neighbourhood, a guy named Kim Sturdivant. He founded it, and then it spread right across the globe, ended up in the UK a couple of years later, quickly peaked and then stopped.
It did feel like, even though we sort of saying it was around for ages, it did feel like as quickly as it arrived, it went. There's another style, which I think we're going to probably do for a hype or tripe very soon, which also seems to be making a resurgence. And I have them in the same bracket, and that's cold IPAs.
Indeed, yeah.
It felt like it was very briefly the rage to do a cold IPA and say what was brewed on the cold side, etc. And then that died a death and it's coming back again. But that's for another time. We're here for a Brute IPA. Now, when I poured mine, after our little discussion about champagne, it comes out like champagne.
Tiny little bubbles.
Tiny little bubbles in the head, and it's quite a decent head, but it soon goes down.
Yeah, it pours just like it, yeah.
This smells actually quite fruity, but quite grapey at the same time.
Yeah, tiny bit hazy. Brute IPAs aren't renowned for haziness, are they? I think they're usually quite clean looking. Oh, wow. Bone dry. That is exactly bone dry, isn't it?
I could take drier. I don't know what that says about. I'd have it a bit drier.
You're a sick man.
It is dry. It is dry. That's not to sort of underplay it. It is dry.
You have a mouthful, and the liquid is in your mouth, and then when it's gone, your mouth feels completely dry.
Coats the roof of your mouth a bit, or it either coats it or it's taking all the moisture out.
I think it's
it really
taking it out.
lingers.
Yeah.
It really lingers in that sense.
That's clever, isn't it?
I personally couldn't have two Brute IPAs in a row. It'd be like the Sahara. It's an enjoyable experience, but it is just, I wonder if that's why it didn't work very well, because you can have one, but you wouldn't be going back to the bar for another can or another third or another half or anything.
No, if you went to a tap room and they got it on, and you were in the tap room for a couple of hours, you'd have one, wouldn't you? You'd have one of several beers, and this would be one of them.
I think this is why it did work as a style when it first came around, is everything was hazy, everything was juicy, and these, a bit like a West Coast, just cut through. So if you were in a tap room, like you say, if you've had a few fruity pales and they're all blended into one, this would absolutely reset your palate.
It would be a bit of a palate cleanser, wouldn't it?
Mm.
Well, I've been known on sessions sometimes to sort of stop the beer and have a glass of wine midway through, and I find that can do wonderful things for resetting the palate. Dave's thinking, oh my God, what are you doing? But no, it really works. Stop the beer flow, bit of wine, bit of cheese, carry on with the beer. It's perfect. And this beer is a bit like that, but without going to the wine.
I admire your constitution that you can drink wine and then go back to beer.
Oh, well, yeah, it's been known.
That was my issue there. I just can't if I move to one, yeah, exactly, I can't go back. So what do you think?
I like it. When I spotted this beer, Hamilton was saying in their, I think it was a mailer they sent out and I saw it, they were saying we wanted to just brew and Brute IPA, so we did one. Whether that means we're going to see more of them, whether it was just because they fancied doing one. But yeah, I've got to admire their stance for, they might not be fashionable and trendy, but we like it, we're going to do it. Good on you. I like that. For all it might not be a hype beer in terms of everybody's talking about it, it's a hype beer in terms of the style because it was once so popular. I like it. I think that's good. I think it does exactly what it's supposed to.
If you're sort of breaking the beer down, it is quite one note. It is just quite dry. Like there's no real change in what you get in fruit wise or anything like that. It's just ultra crisp. There's a bit of fruitiness on the nose. Some will say hyper dry. I think it's dry. I think you're getting it. I think it's drier for your palate.
Yeah.
But I like it. But I don't need to now have one for a little while. So perhaps it's not a hype beer and it can be resurgent. But I wouldn't mind it if I saw them sort of creeping back onto tap rooms and things like that, and a few other cans popping up of people doing them.
Yeah, it'd be nice, wouldn't it, if Hamilton could start a bit of a trend and they started coming back. I think this is what happens in craft beer. Everything goes in phases, doesn't it?
Yeah, but there's only so many styles you can do.
Yeah. So you can imagine that back when this guy in San Francisco came across this style, sort of stumbled across it almost accidentally, you can see why everybody tried to replicate it, because it was something different.
Yeah, exactly. It's the next big thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whatever will be found as, we've had these. We had when everyone started doing tippers. And then briefly when they all started trying to do quads. And then sort of decided that was probably a bit too much, and then it sort of came back.
You've got your table beers now, which are going from strength to strength.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do a table beer special on the next episode, aren't we?
Yes, even though the temperatures are starting to change now, unfortunately, and it looks like autumn is finally here, we're getting probably more where people are thinking about darker beers. I think when people are going out, they're still drinking lighter, sessionable beers, and I think the table beer probably is here to stay regardless of the season. So
I think it is. Everybody's got one now, haven't they?
Great style, and people have really refined them and made them great beers.
Yeah, it's not just a watery yellow liquid anymore, as maybe it was not so long ago. People are actually making them taste of something interesting now. Some great table beers around. So if you have got a favourite table beer you want us to discuss on the podcast, let us know, and we'll give it a mention on that next episode, when Hype or Tripe is a really interesting one, because we've got the guys from Turning Point coming on to talk through the beer that is our next Hype or Tripe beer. So Dave, best behaviour, you better like this beer.
Well, it was a raging success the last time we had Turning Point on to do Hype or Tripe, because that was when they were doing their custard beers.
It was.
And Cameron talked us through the beers and we tasted them and then got to find out about the thinking behind them, which was brilliant. So they are the latest people who have managed to get the master of dark beer in the UK, Damien from Emperors, and they have released a beer called Pulpatine, which is, as you would expect, a big stout, but it's got some interesting fruit elements to it, which I'm sure we'll find out more about.
So we're looking forward to that.
And I think we've enjoyed this beer as well. We've sort of talked about some other beers as well. I think the fact we've talked about the other beers like we have shows that there's not loads you can say about this beer. I would say if you've never tried a Brut IPA and you like the sound of a beer that is dry, it is a dry beer, that's the best way to describe it, then give it a go.
I think if you've got a load of beers lined up and somebody gave you this one, you may not be able to say, oh yes, this is a Brut IPA, but you'd certainly be able to tell it's different to the other stuff you were drinking. It really stands out. Yeah,
that's it. If you want something that stands out, if you're sort of a bit tired of having the big three of Citra, Simcoe, Mosaic blended in with some other hops to create the next fruity pale, and you want something a little bit different, this would be the way to go, just to break things up a bit.
Hamilton have still got them on their website with a whole load of other stuff as well. I think if you spend over £40, the postage is free.
Daftaboutcraft.
You have been listening to episode 34 of Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast. Thanks for taking the time to tune in and hear what we have to say. If you'd like to get in touch with us, Instagram's the best way. Just drop us a message on there. In the meantime, we will be back on Monday, October the 3rd with more craft beer goodness. We'll see you then.
Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast.